Hey guys, Eli with Eli Tomalka Woodworks here. With the help of Promise Epoxy, today I'm going to be showing you how to build this end grain cookie table. Alrighty, so we got our cookie slab here. This is a highly figured slab of black walnut. So for now, we gotta get this stabilized and ready for epoxy. We're gonna build a mold basically around this piece. So what I'm gonna do is start by removing all the bark. Because we are gonna be stabilizing a lot of these cracks, or all of these cracks with the Promise Deep Pour, we need to make sure we remove that bark so we can seal that edge in some way, shape, or form. To dam that epoxy from leaving in those spots. Definitely use caution with your chisels as always. Anytime I'm working with epoxy, I'm trying to get any fiber that's not actual wood grain off the surface of the wood. For this application, it's more to get a flat seal on the edge, because you're not just gonna throw tape over bark or anything really over bark and expect it to stop epoxy from coming out of these seeping edges. Where you can see there's cracks, there needs to be somewhat of a flat surface to seal that up, and so you get a real strong bond and your resin's not trying to grab onto something that's not strong or not really attached to the wood. So now that we've got all our bark removed and fibers along the edges, we're gonna have to come in with some duct tape and seal off the thickness side of these cracks. So I've got my bottom side up right now. Try to get it as flush as you can and as flat, no kinks or nothing on the side there, because once again this is sealing the side. There's going to be nothing else other than this barrier than letting that super thin deep pour epoxy seep out. Now that we've got our tape down, sealing up all our live edge cracks around the outsides, we're gonna go ahead and bring our melamine over. I've pre-cut this melamine, it's just left over from a larger dining room table epoxy pour. So I've got it cut to size, manageable for my space in this piece. And once again, this isn't the only way to go about doing this. This is a partial epoxy pour, so we're figuring out how to seal around the edges of this piece to make sure the epoxy doesn't end up on your shop floor. So now what I'm going to do is trace out the shape of this live edge slab on top of my melamine here. I'm going to do this so I can apply mold release under where this live edge slab is going to be receiving that epoxy on the bottom side, so you don't end up like this. Alrighty, so the reason I'm tracing the outline here is just so I have an idea of where the slab is actually going to sit on the melamine. Now that I've got an idea of where the slab is going to be, I can take my universal mold release. I'm actually going to come in with a shop towel here and buff this in. So it's really filling in those fine little pores, kind of like a tooth enamel is a good way to think about it, so that epoxy has nothing to grab onto. Now we're ready to seal up this slab with some caulk. I'm going to go ahead and start sealing this edge. I'm going to start with this real low spot and work my way around. Just bead all around this super organic, oddly shaped slab. So now we've got that bead going all the way around. You can just take the finger, this is the best part, making sure you're basically sealing off that bottom edge. Eli Tomalka Woodworks started, I say my established date was 2019. Right after graduating high school, I was going to school for woodworking and furniture design. And I had a lot of offcuts with that sort of thing, and obviously a lot of wood around me, being in a school setting, a big shop. So I got the idea, or was kind of getting inspiration online, and and milling up hardwood and creating these little cutting boards to pay for my beer in college. So made an Instagram for my work and kind of used that as an opportunity to make a portfolio online. And so that first same Instagram I have today, that was really my introduction to kind of the business side of things prior to COVID, which ended up leading me to this area and, you know, blooming into the scale I've got it at now. I'm gonna take some preventative measures on the top surface and kind of mask off a couple depression areas, just kind of damming these spots in. So all these preventative measures are really gonna help out because it's so fluid. All right, so we went ahead, got this guy sealed up on our melamine. Everything is locked in, ready to go for a pour. Personally, I like to just go ahead and weight the top of it. I use taped off bricks. Make sure you apply that Tyvek or packing tape to the bottom of the brick or any surface that's gonna be possibly introduced to epoxy. Beautiful. In regards to getting poured up, I'm in a very well ventilated space, so if you're not in a large shop, a smaller space like a basement or a small workspace in general, go ahead and make sure to wear a respirator. Make sure to wear gloves when you're mixing up your epoxy. You don't want skin contact to that chemical in any form, so I'm gonna go ahead and get the gloves on here. And I've got my safety glasses ready to go for when I mix up that epoxy. I do not want to open up an opportunity for my eyes to be exposed to the resin when I'm mixing. So I've got my Promise Deep Pour here. I'm gonna go ahead up and mix up a small batch for this pour. It's only 28, 30 or so ounces. So I'm gonna mix this up in a small portion, pigment it, and go ahead and pour it into my cracks and recesses in my slab. Alrighty. So we've got our Promise Deep Pour here. This is a 2-to-1 ratio. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mix up that 26, 28 ounce portion for this. And I like to start with the part B. It is the looser part, so it's a little bit easier to incorporate when I start with this, in my opinion. So I've got my stir stick here. I like to use any old painter stir stick from hardware stores. And I've got my pigment of choice. So this is a mica pigment. Once again, this is a metallic. So it's got that little bit of sheen added in, a little bit of sparkle. I love to use this blue color with black walnut. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix some of this into my resin. And for this, I'm going for quality over quantity is what I like to say in regards to mixing. So just making sure both components are thoroughly mixed together, scraping the sides and the bottom. It's not a rush. This is a key part to making sure your epoxy is evenly and thoroughly mixed, is going slow, not trying to force a bunch of air in there, and grabbing as much from the sides and the bottom as you can, and not just going at it from the middle. Alrighty. So I use a bit of a slow pour method with this and just kind of get it to be a thin bead when coming out of my mixing cup to try to hit all of these little cracks. So I'm going to try to kind of control the cup with the mixing stick here and just kind of beat it in. Beautiful. I'll go ahead and hit our large depression here. Just filling that up all the way to the top, hitting all these side crevices and cracks along the live edge. Beautiful. As you can see, you can kind of already see the epoxy sitting down in these cracks, eventually nestling itself under the slab and against the melamine where we have our mold released to go ahead and make that barrier. So when you see bubbles on top, kind of in the depressions you just filled, That's just the epoxy settling in and pushing the air up, basically. So that's no worry. Once again, we're using the deep pour resin. So just keep an eye on it. And it's likely that you're gonna do more than one pour with this. So once this resin kind of settles in under the slab, works out any kinks it might have, I like to actually let it set up for a bit. So I'm letting this resin set up for likely upwards of 30 hours and kind of ending up hardening up. So I'm gonna let this set up likely upwards of that 30-hour mark. Then I'm gonna come back, hit it with a second round of epoxy, let that cure up. But I've got one ready to go that we've already poured up and is ready to be demolded. Gone through that same process. I ended up doing 2 pours with it. It had a bit of a leak that I stabilized, and it's ready to go. So we're gonna go grab that now, get that demolded. Alrighty, so we're gonna get right into going ahead and demolding this guy. So this epoxy has sat and set up for a couple of days now. It does take a couple pours to get it to where we're actually filling these holes and these crevices and these cracks because we are losing some epoxy underneath the piece. As it is sealed up, obviously we lost some on the edges here, but that's why we take the preventative measures with the silicone caulk to kind of make sure that doesn't end up on your shop floor. And so yeah, we're gonna jump right into demolding this guy. We're gonna be pulling these bricks off because we ended up using tape on the bottom of these bricks. The epoxy didn't grab it as much. They locked it in, but it's gonna be much easier to release, and there's gonna be no real pieces of brick on our epoxy piece, which is gonna be a good thing when we go to flatten this piece and shape it. As you can see, the tape did its job, and that's kind of a good example of that. Alrighty, so now we've got to jump right into releasing the silicone. So that a silicone bond is actually going to be a lot stronger than the epoxy bond to the melamine. So we've got to get in there and kind of release the silicone with some sort of razor. So I've got my little knife here, and I'm just going to kind of follow it along that edge we set. So yeah, my style is highly figured hardwood, emphasis on wood grain, picking out wood grain that is one-off, that you've never seen before, growth deformities and transitions in a tree's life, using mixed media like epoxy to stabilize these areas, cracks and all sorts of casting opportunities with wood. So there's got to be, in my opinion, in the way I design, an emphasis in highly figured wood. So that's very evident in my style, and I like to design more modern, mid-century modern components to the furniture as well to support that. Alrighty, so I went ahead and got this guy all flattened out after pulling it off of our partial mold situation. Brought it over to a local woodworking buddy of mine, Dane over at Country Home Rustics, and Ryan. They've got a great setup over in East Flat Rock. I was able to take down the unnecessary, after we got all the melamine off, the unnecessary epoxy, got it nice and flat so I didn't have to run it through my drum sander, which saved a bunch of time, but it did leave some marks from the big cutter head on their CNC router. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this all drum sanded up, and then we're gonna finish sanding and kind of knocking off all this excess caulk and all of the unnecessary epoxy on the edges, making it real nice and pretty, working our way through the grits with the Festool Rotex sanders, and yeah. Alrighty, so I went ahead, got this guy drum sanded down with the 80 grit on the drum sander. So for this, I went with a tinted epoxy, a super deep dark red. So it's gonna kind of turn up as a real dark color, like a real dark black, so we're not really having to go super high in the grit. So I'm gonna work my way up now from that 60 back to 80, 120, and then we'll go to 180 with a water pop after that. Now now we're about to do the alcohol pop, and this is what I spray my alcohol with. It's just like a pretty standard lawn half-gallon sprayer. So make sure to get it nice and evenly distributed. Some really good figure popping through on both sides. So just make sure you evenly coat this with the alcohol so every little grain can get raised up, and you can knock it down with the 240. I'm going to go ahead and get these sides sprayed up. Alright, so I went ahead and got this sanded up to 240, our finishing grit for this sanding. With all my pieces, I like to drop my branding on there somewhere, just kind of like how an artist signs all their pieces. It's kind of my way to do that, and it's a nice organic logo. My initials, ET. So I'm just going to kind of drop it right on these big growth rings here on the back. Beautiful. A lot of people will spray water in the area prior to dropping their brand, and that will alleviate this issue of a little bit of that smoky residue coming off the brand. So I'm just going to hit it with 240. It does exactly the same thing without having to recycle through your grits because you've water popped the area. So next, what I'm going to do for this table is kind of lay out where my legs are going to be. Deciding on where they go in relation to the center of the slab is kind of important, but I am the eyeballer, as I call myself. So I'm going to chuck these guys on here. Oops, careful of your nicely sanded edges. So I'm going to go ahead and by hand mark where these guys are going to need to be recessed. So the reason we're recessing where these guys are going to sit is because this surface is just going to aesthetically and sensory wise, feeling the bottom of the table, be a lot better off if it's flush with the surface of the bottom of the table. Alrighty, so now that we've got our table base mounts routed out, recessed in the bottom of the table, we can go ahead and proceed with the finishing portion, which is the fun portion. After all your hard work, you get to see your highly figured hardwood displayed to its best ability. I like to use natural finishes, so I'm going to use oils, anything that's going to bring out the wood grain and these natural crazy tones in this black walnut. So there's a ton of grain variation going on already. We're just going to go ahead and accentuate that with an oil. So I'm going to apply this thin, make sure I'm spreading it out. So yeah, it's super important to make sure you're covering all sides and all little nooks and crannies of the live edge, and getting a really good idea of where you have and haven't hit with the finish, because there are, obviously, as you can tell, light spots in the grain that might fool you into thinking, or it's a good example at least of what it might look like when you've missed a spot. Although I've already hit it, there's some light spots in it. So just keeping an eye out for light areas where your finish hasn't touched yet, just because you don't want any bare exposed wood. Obviously that's an incomplete finish, as well as exposure to moisture, air, and all that stuff that could be that the slab could take on post finish. So, alrighty guys, we're all finished up with this end grain cookie table. Hope you enjoyed it. Once again, Eli with Eli Tomalka Woodworks. Feel free to follow along on Instagram. See more projects like this in the future, custom furniture commissions, and more collaborations to come with Promise Epoxy. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, and follow on all platforms at Eli Tomalka Woodworks, as well as Promise Epoxy. That's a wrap.